Manhunt 2, 2007. Developed by Rockstar Games, this title quickly became one of the most talked about releases of its time, and not for quiet reasons. The game centers around stealth, but not the kind where you quietly sneak past enemies and feel clever. Here, stealth is used to get close enough to carry out brutal executions, and the game leans heavily into showing those moments in detail. It does not rush them, and it does not look away. That design choice is exactly what pushed it into controversy. When the ESRB gave it an adults-only rating in the United States, it was essentially a wall. Major console platforms refused to carry it, and most retailers would not even consider putting it on shelves. At that point, the game existed, but nowhere you could actually buy it. It's almost like being invited to a party and then being told the door is permanently locked. Rockstar had to go back and tone things down, editing the most intense elements just to bring the rating down to something that could be sold. Even then, the reputation stuck. People knew what the original version looked like, and not Shadow followed the game. The situation made one thing very clear. You do not always need a government to ban something. Sometimes a rating label is enough to quietly shut everything down. Hatred, 2015. Created by a smaller studio, this game took a very direct approach. It did not try to build a layered story or give the player a moral dilemma. Instead, it introduced a character who openly expresses hatred for the world and then lets the player act on it. That is the entire foundation. No emotional backstory, no deeper explanation waiting to be uncovered later, just pure hostility from the beginning. That simplicity is what made it uncomfortable for many people. There was nothing to balance it out, nothing to soften the experience. When it appeared on Steam, it immediately sparked backlash. The platform removed it, which only made more people curious about it. Then it was brought back, which made the whole situation even more confusing. One moment it was gone, the next it was available again, like someone changed their mind halfway through a serious decision. This case shows how modern distribution works. Games are no longer only controlled by physical stores. Digital platforms now act as gatekeepers, deciding what stays and what goes. And sometimes those decisions can change quickly, leaving everyone else trying to keep up with what is actually allowed. Thrillkill, 1998. This game reached a rare position where it was fully completed and still never officially released. It was designed as a fighting game, but instead of focusing on competition or skill, it leaned heavily into shock value. The characters were intentionally disturbing, and the violence was exaggerated in a way that made it stand out, but not in a comfortable way. After the studio behind it was acquired, the new publisher reviewed the game and made a decision that stopped everything. Rather than risk public backlash, they chose to cancel it entirely. No release, no marketing, no attempt to adjust or soften the content, just a complete shutdown. Imagine finishing a project, getting it ready for the world, and then being told it will never leave the room. Despite this, the game did not completely disappear. Copies eventually leaked, and people were able to see what had been created. That only added to its reputation. It became one of those titles people talk about more because it was never properly released. In a way, being canceled made it more famous than it might have been otherwise. The Guy Game, 2004. At first glance, this looked like a simple party game. It mixed trivia questions with live-action footage, creating something that felt casual and easy to pick up. It was not designed to be shocking or extreme. In fact, it seemed like the kind of game you would play briefly and then move on from. Then, everything changed when it was discovered that some of the footage included in the game involved an underage individual in inappropriate circumstances. This was no longer a matter of taste or opinion. It became a legal issue immediately. Once that information became public, the reaction was swift and decisive. The game was pulled from stores, distribution stopped, and legal action followed. There was no attempt to recover or rework the product. It was simply removed. This situation stands apart from the others because it was not about pushing creative boundaries, it was about crossing a legal line, and once that happened, there was no path forward. Rape Lay, 2006. Originating from Japan, this visual novel became widely known outside its home country because of its extremely controversial content. It presented themes that were immediately rejected by audiences in the United States. Even without an official release, awareness spread quickly and reactions followed just as fast. Attempts to import and distribute the game were met with strong opposition. Advocacy groups raised concerns, and public pressure grew. Retailers and distributors chose to stay away from it entirely. It did not go through a long legal battle. It simply never found a place in the market. This case reflects how different cultural standards can shape what is accepted. A game that exists in one region does not automatically find acceptance in another, and sometimes that gap is so large that the product never crosses over at all. Postal 2, 2003. This game built its identity around freedom, but not the calm or controlled kind. It gives players a set of normal objectives, but also the ability to ignore all of them and cause chaos instead. The world reacts, but it doesn't really stop you. That open-ended design is what made it stand out. However, that same freedom is what made it controversial. The actions available to players went well beyond what most games allowed at the time. As a result, while it was not banned in the United States, some retailers chose not to carry it. They simply didn't want to be associated with it. So the game existed in an unusual space. It was available, but not always easy to find. It depended on where you looked and who was willing to sell it. This shows how access can be limited not by law, but by choice. Leisure Suit Larry, Magna Cum Laude, 2004. This title continued a long-running series known for its focus on adult humor and awkward social situations. It leaned heavily into suggestive content, building its entire experience around it. The tone was consistent from beginning to end, never stepping away from that identity. While it was released in the United States, its content made some retailers hesitant. Not every store wanted to explain why they were selling it, and not every shelf felt like the right place for it. As a result, its availability varied depending on location. This is a quieter form of restriction. The game is not banned, but it's also not fully embraced. It exists in a middle space where it's allowed but not always welcomed, and that can limit how far it reaches, even without any formal barrier. 6 Days in Fallujah, 2009. This project took a different approach by focusing on real-world events, specifically the Second Battle of Fallujah during the Iraq War. Unlike fictional settings, this was based on recent history, involving people and events that were still fresh in public memory. That choice brought immediate attention, and not all of it was positive. Concerns were raised about whether such a serious and recent conflict should be turned into a game. Families connected to the events, along with others, spoke out against it. The discussion quickly moved beyond gameplay into questions of timing, respect, and purpose. As the backlash grew, the pressure became too strong to ignore. The project was canceled before it could be released in the United States. It stands as an example of how real-world context can shape a game's fate. Sometimes the issue is not what the game does, but when and how it chooses to do it.